بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. كما أشار الدكتور أسامة لدينا مداخلة عن بعد الآن. مؤشر الابتكار العالمي هو تقرير سنوي تصدره المنظمة العالمية للملكية الفكرية، وهو تصنيف سنوي للدول حسب قدرتها على الابتكار ونجاحها في تنفيذه. في إطار التعاون القائم بين الاتحاد والمنظمة العالمية للملكية الفكرية وباسمكم جميعا، اسمحوا لي أن أقدم البروفيسور ساشا وانش، رئيس قسم الاقتصاد والإحصاء ومحرر شريك لتقرير مؤشر الابتكار العالمي، ليلقي الضوء حول مؤشرات الابتكار العالمي للدول العربية. Professor Sasha, on behalf of the organizing committee of this forum, I would like to extend our thanks and gratitude for accepting our invitation to address this important event. And we invite you to present your talk, GII 2025 Insights for Arab Countries. Please, Prof.
Good morning, everybody. Mohammed, you think, do you want me to start a little bit earlier today?
Good morning, Prof. Sasha. You can start now.
Okay, give me 2 minutes. Good morning again. It's a great pleasure to be with you at the Federation of Arab Scientific Research Councils. And thanks you very much also to our host, Oman, but also to Dr. Resk from Egypt for inviting me. There could not be a better time for this particular meeting, as the Northern Africa and Middle East sort of Arab-speaking economy region is doing better and better. We've seen tremendous improvements in innovation performance over the last 2 to 3 years, and this is what my presentation will be mainly about. So with this in mind, let me briefly share my presentation. So many of you will be aware of the Global Innovation Index. Indeed, in the region, we've had a rather big uptake of the use of the WIPO Global Innovation Index to steer the collection of innovation metrics and to improve innovation policy. So in particular, our work with Oman, United Arab Emirates, certain Central Asian countries, but also Egypt, Morocco, Algeria, has been extremely active since we started the GII, and way before these efforts were really reflected in rank improvements. So you can really see that the use of the GII in the region has started a long time ago, but it took about 10 years for measurable impacts to be seen in the rankings. Now the GII, as you probably know, consists first and foremost of innovation rankings. So we produce rankings, but in particular economy briefs for about 140 economies based on their innovation performance. Now at WIPO, the idea was never to stop at the rankings, right? So ideally, the rankings attract initial attention by ministers and prime ministers, presidents, and the general notion, and I think on this one there has been some success, is to really shift the policymakers' attention to innovation and intellectual property on the same par as other economic policy matters. In addition to the rankings, we have introduced progressively other components of the GII. One is the Global Innovation Tracker. It takes the pulse of global state of innovation over time. So it will tell us, for instance, the expenditure on research and development over time in the world, the expenditure on venture capital in the world, and the deployment of intellectual property in the world, for example. This gives, in addition to the national rankings, gives to policymakers and analysts some sort of a state of play of innovation. As you know, in the most recent years, with COVID and more recently with other geopolitical evolutions and happenings, there is, certain economic cycles, and policymakers are wondering how this impacts innovation. And then finally, and this is our newest edition, we also do an analysis on what are the top 100 innovation clusters in the world, with a new method actually that we introduced this year, 2020-25, where we include venture capital as a key metric. Now, I would spend almost all my time today on the innovation rankings, but I want to show here a little bit of a chart on the innovation clusters as well, which might be interesting for your future discussions. For the innovation clusters, our method is quite innovative. We actually look at where most publications, patents, and venture capital deals really occur with microdata. And then we look which are the most densest areas where these innovation activities occur. And based on these little dots that you see, which essentially are addresses of inventors, authors, or venture capital deals, we identify the highest concentration of innovation. Now, the top innovation clusters are, as one would expect, in Japan, in China, the United States, and Europe. But it's quite interesting to see that a lot of them are emerging as well in emerging economies. We just saw Sao Paulo, but you have 4 at least in India. You have Tehran, who is one, and I'm very glad to report that for 2 years in a row now, and congratulations, Dr. Resk, Cairo is actually part of the top 100, which made us, of course, particularly happy because, it's of course more fun or more interesting to see low and middle income countries making the top 100 as well. If it were just European economies or the United States, it would be less diverse. In terms of the region that we're discussing today, the Arab-speaking countries, Cairo is the one included. I note, however, that a few, in particular in the United Arab Emirates or in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, but also in Morocco, are relatively close to making or being in the vicinity of the top 100. Now, this being said, let me speak a little bit about the innovation ranking, and in particular the innovation momentum that we see building in Arab-speaking economies. Now, we've really seen, as I mentioned, in the outset to my presentation a decade of change, where innovation momentum is occurring in Arab-speaking NAVA economies. So here is a slide with the current ranking of the economies covered, ranging from United Emirates ranked at 30th down to others in Northern Africa, and Oman here, our host, at 69. Again, as I said, this is not a coincidence. We engage with member states around the world, about maybe 70, 80 countries, where we have GII, cross-ministerial task forces, where countries ask us how to improve the data, how to improve the policy. And in fact, many of the NAVA economies that we speak here have been doing this with us for more than 10 years. So they've been quite early in reaching out to us as part mostly of their quest for further diversification, right? The notion that to move away from natural resource exploitation to more innovative, diversified economies has given it a boost. But even though these, many of these economies here present are relatively affluent in terms of resources, even for them, it was not exactly automatic to produce highly innovative and efficient innovation ecosystems, right? Scholars and researchers, so but producing these sort of ecosystems where there's perfect linkages between science and industry, where there is mobility of researchers from science to private industry, where there is sound innovation finance, where there is filing of intellectual property and related commercialization. That takes decades to form, and this is what we've been seeing. So we see now sound and incipient innovation systems in some of the economies here on the slide, but still some work to go in terms of getting closer to the most sophisticated innovation ecosystems. You see this also, the sort of new decade of innovation momentum in terms of the top climbers since 2019. So on the right-hand side of my slide, you see Jordan, Bahrain, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia. So those are 4 economies among the 6 that climbed most rapidly, and some, to some quite significant extent, like 68 to 46 for Saudi Arabia, for example. In the GII, we are also able to detect top universities, top unicorns, top companies. And, I invite each of you to maybe download your economy brief, because you will see which universities, which companies, and which R&D spenders we flag in particular for your country. But it's just to say that there's a lot of top universities that are now shining across the region. I've just listed a few of them here, like Cairo University in Egypt, like American University of the Middle East in Kuwait, and Sultan Qaboos University in Oman. The same is true with innovation clusters. As I just mentioned before, Cairo is within the top 100 innovation clusters and close to entering 2 of the KSA, Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, Riyadh, and Dammam. In terms of unicorns present, we see less, of course, in the region than, for example, in the United States, obviously, or in high-income economies of the OECD type, but there are a few that we detect, such as Vista Global in Dubai, Tamara in Riyadh, and Halan in Cairo. So there's some incipient presence of unicorns. What is maybe a little bit more problematic is we don't detect much private R&D expenditures across the region, in particular in privately held companies. So the number of large multinationals that operate overall in the region outside of oil gas companies, who spend a lot on R&D and at the same time file for intellectual property and are integrated in global value chains. This is much more rare than in other similarly ranked economies. So this is really future work for the region. So what is working? Regional strengths first, and then I will conclude on some challenges or some possibly future policy options. So in terms of Western Asia, and I will limit myself to Western Asia, possibly meaning the Middle East kind of, because that is what we're discussing today. So we see a strong stability of institutions and heavy buildup of infrastructure. Interestingly, for the most part, energy infrastructure did not really seem to be a dramatically important component of innovation ecosystems in the past, but with artificial intelligence, it has not, you have realized and seen that the presence of cheap energy and power is suddenly becoming quite a critical component of AI innovation ecosystems. And of course, the region is very well placed with direct access to relatively abundant and affordable energy. On the input side, of course, given the willingness to diversify, we've seen amazing investments in education, in research and development, and in a good business environment. We see some selected strong research centers. So I will not say, of course, that there are many per country, but there's a few that are already noticeable on a global scale, and a startup ecosystem which is emerging. So it's not a startup ecosystem which is as fluid, of course, as in some European or American sort of cities, where from startup you go quite easily to scale up and innovation finance, venture capital. So that is still in the making, but I have personally been at startup gatherings in the region and even given prizes to startups, seen pitches and VC pitches, and so it's really an ecosystem which is becoming more and more professional for startups.
Professor Sasha,
yes, sir.
Excuse me for interruption. Maybe we'll give you 3 more minutes, please.
I understood.
Okay.
Okay. And also, of course, strong innovation funds. Now, what are angles? And I'll conclude on this slide, and there's many more details at the rest on the in the 3-4 following slides on what could possibly be done in the region with very specific, I'll show you just one, very specific measures in terms of R&D to GDP goals, certain instruments which you could put in place for public industry R&D consortia. I prepared about 5 policy slides on this based on our regional launch of the GII in the region and recent work. So that's maybe something that you could look at separately. But the main messages are really included in this slide, so I will finish on this one. So technically, of course, we see 6 main engines in Arab-speaking countries. One is the idea to innovate from within. And what do I mean by this? It's actually to try to first look at existing players, which will be naturally in natural resource areas in many of your countries, and to try to, despite, of course, the good situation of these companies, to make them more innovative players. So spend more on R&D and intellectual property in their specific fields, but also look for nexus fields, such as green technology and new material. Then the second element is to innovate in new realms. So without actually, so leaving the strong sectors that exist and go relatively hard, but it's still important to diversify into new systems. The path to developing functioning science systems is something that I've mentioned. The research centers that exist are becoming stronger and stronger. It's important to increase their local linkages with industry. That is often still insufficient and a major challenge. So there's these very good research centers that still, and that also have labs, you know, that they could technically make available to the private sector. But for, in many cases, those linkages don't exactly still work. Innovation finance is the fourth component. In many of your economies, there's strong public sector-led finance mechanisms in place, such as sovereign wealth funds, for example. However, as economists, we often are quite keen.
Thank you, Professor Sasha. If you can conclude in a minute,
Yeah.
because
Thank you very much.
yes, thank
Yeah,
you very much for your
Thank you.
very valuable input. You have 1 minute more.
Okay, yeah, I was just concluding. So it's important to leap from knowledge creation to commercialization, and then, of course, look at the regional market and growth collaboration, so with partners across the region in these important innovation areas. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sasha. Thank you very much.